Hey there, and welcome to the Inclusion Solution Live. I am your season 6 host, Mareisha Reese. This season is From MEpower to MEpower, BIPOC Leadership Conversations. I'm so happy to have you here on this journey with me. And in case you missed it, this season we're talking about some of the unique challenges that BIPOC leaders face, especially in dominant group spaces, and how they use their innate power, that me power, to thrive. It is a pleasure to welcome my guest today, Valda Valbrun. Valda is an established educational leader known for passion towards inclusive, research-based, and data-driven pedagogy. As a systems change facilitator, she has a proven track record of supporting organizations to change practices and establish systems for equity. She is known as a dynamic professional developer, teacher, administrator, entrepreneur, advocate, and student champion. Valda works with school districts, nonprofits, and organizations on leadership development and executive coaching, and provides coaching and support. In 2016, Valda founded the Valbrun Consulting Group to offer support in the areas of strategic planning, strategy management, and organizational development, and works specifically to build the capacity to lead for equity, create equitable work and learning environments, mitigate opportunity gaps, and implement systems for improvement, as well as manage change for results. Welcome to the show, Valda.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here with you today.
I am very happy to be here with you, and not included in Valda's bio, but she's also a friend of mine. So, and in addition to all the other things, Valda is a good friend. So I'm very, very excited to have her here today. By way of further introduction, you all know that we like to start with I am statements, which we use often at the Winners Group to highlight our intersecting identities and the lived experiences we bring to the conversation. I will model it, and then I will invite you, Valda, to introduce yourself in a similar way. I am a Black, cisgender, able-bodied woman, a Zennial, so that's, I think, a newer term, meaning I'm at the cusp of millennial and Gen X, but I probably lean more Gen X. An introvert, a wife, a daughter, a sister, a dog mom. I am a current Southerner, but was born and raised in the Northeast United States. So, Velda, I invite you to share your I am with our listeners.
Absolutely. So I am a proud daughter of Haitian immigrants. I think that shapes a big part of my identity. I'm a mom, I'm a sister, I'm an auntie, I'm a recent great auntie. I'm a leader. And I think at my core, I'm a teacher. And I think what I'm really trying to embody is the meaning of my name, right? Because the meaning of my name is, with fierce power. So I'm claiming it. So I am fierce and powerful. How you like that?
I don't know if I've ever knew that or heard you say that, but how fitting for this MEpower episode for your name to be Me Fierce Power. So yeah. I love it. That is beautiful. And congratulations on being a recent, you said great aunt.
Great auntie, yes. She's actually 11 months old. Her name is Carter. She's super cute.
Congratulations there. Yeah, thank you so much for introducing yourself that way for our listeners to get a little more insight into who you are. So let's jump into some of these questions. Mm-hmm. So you've shared a little bit about your identity and I am, but I would like you to go a little deeper and see if you could share your story, your background and experience, and how it led you to do the work that you do today.
Yeah, I led with the part about me being the child of Haitian immigrants because I think it's so unique in many ways. I'm born in this country. I'm the only one of my 6 siblings that's born here. And so I had a very unique upbringing where at home I was very Haitian, but at school I was very Americanized. And so I always had to kind of live on that, intersecting cusp. And I think by virtue of that, I didn't get to explore all parts of me until I became an adult. So I had traveled to Haiti once as a child, once when I was a baby and another time when I was 12, but I became a board member of Teach for Haiti. And got to travel to Haiti annually for 5 consecutive years where we had our board meetings. And then I fully kind of immersed myself in the culture and it really became a big part of who I am. I got to practice the language, which I hadn't been doing enough of. I got to really see the culture. I got to really begin to understand how much it shapes who I am. And so now I'm in my 50s, and I totally love the fact that I have that part of my heritage that I can carry forward and hopefully instill in my own daughter and, and all of my siblings' kids, because many of them have never traveled to Haiti yet either. And so I want to correct, but I think it's a big part of who I am because it shapes the way that I think about, the American experience, right? Knowing that my parents had a very distinct experience than what I had coming to this country as immigrants, seeing how immigrants are under fire and how they're not appreciated, and recognizing how many sacrifices they had to make to be able to have, 6 children that went on to, college and master's degrees and established businesses and that kind of thing. That's huge. And so I sit back and I often think about how I'm kind of sitting on their shoulders, sitting on shoulders of so many sacrifices that were made. If you know anything about the Haitian culture too, the role that Haiti plays in, emancipation, right? And how it set an example for what we've experienced here. And so I sit in that level of pride. Like I recognize that, the people that I come from didn't tolerate, being oppressed, right? And they're paying for it to this day. And so whenever I feel challenged, whenever I feel like I'm not capable of something, I think back to like, girl, where you come from? Come on now, you got this, right? And so I use my Haitian heritage to kind of inspire myself, and to recognize that I have power, right? That we all have agency. And so it's a big part of who I am.
I love that. I want to go a little more into, like, I just love how you so strongly are proud of your Haitian identity and not ashamed, not, you don't shy away. But I wonder if you find that, immigrants or, folks that you worked with that may have come from another country or their parents came from, do you feel that they try to suppress that and try to fit in more? And just sharing a little more, like, why it's so important, especially for you to just own that identity and show up in your spaces as truly who you are, unapologetically who you are.
Yeah, you're right. Because I think oftentimes we're encouraged to, assimilate, right? Especially as children and young children. And for me in particular, I went to a Catholic school where I was like one of 3 Black kids for most of the time that I was there. And so my Haitian identity was very much suppressed. It was very much something that I wasn't necessarily proud of and wasn't made to feel proud of. I was already navigating just being Black, right? So being Black in that space, being a young Black girl who didn't even live in the neighborhood because I was bused 2 towns over to go to the school, right? So I had no connection. So I had to minimize what made me different, right? So I wasn't talking about, hey, by the way, I'm Haitian too, because it would have gotten me teased, right? Especially in the 80s where, Haitianness was associated with AIDS, right? And those kinds of things. So for the most part of my life, I was not acknowledging my Haitian heritage, right? And I don't know that, I don't know that had the words or the skill or the tools to be able to take that level of pride, which is why I came into it late, right? I came into understanding who I was as a Haitian person very late in life, which is probably why it's front and center for me now. But my parents never made us feel like we had to suppress it, right? They were very proud of who they were as individuals. They reminded us almost constantly why they came here, right? How they made sacrifices to allow us to come here and get the education that we've gotten. And they saw the beauty and the benefits of the American dream, right? And so I think that I do this work because I want to make sure that others recognize that America, while it has a lot of issues, right, it is a place where if we embrace who we are and we lead with that, there's so much we can do, right, to affect the kind of change we want to see happen. So yeah, I mean, I think that for me, it took a while, right? And I think I see kids when I work with schools who are from other cultures who are suppressing who they are. And by virtue of the way that schools work, I think they force that, right? I mean, think about how we categorize kids when we collect data and we call them subgroups, right? And it's Black, non-Hispanic, right? White, Asian. We never, so if you're of descent of, you're from Africa, you're from Ghana, you're from all these different places, you speak these different languages, you're being forced to check a box that says Black. Right. And by virtue of that, we're saying all the other things that make you unique and special and different, we're taking them out of the equation. And I think that's what we do to kids. And so I think it's really important for teachers, especially when kids come from diverse backgrounds, socially, culturally, economically different backgrounds, that we allow them to bring their full selves into classrooms and help them explore that, help them empower them with that, make them think, wow, it's amazing. You speak more than one language, about foods from different cultures. That makes you great. That makes you better. Not makes you different in a bad way. It makes you different in a good way, right?
Right.
So yeah, I think it's important for us to help people to identify the things that make them different, especially unique, and allow them to show up in that space.
Yeah, that is so. I love what you said there, especially thinking about students, young kids, because that's the messaging starts early, right? So if they're starting to suppress at that young age. Of course, when they get into corporate America, right, they're even further like, oh yeah, I gotta fit in, assimilate, and that's some of the things that we want to change. But it starts early. It starts early. Like the system is starting very early. So thank you for sharing that. So you touched on too about in addition to being Haitian, even, in schools as a young girl, like you were Black, you're a Black woman, you identify there. So there's so many of these identities that you're trying to be like, look, I don't want to stand out. I want to fit in because right. And so, just curious, what do you think are some of the stereotypes and biases that Black women face in communities, workspace, as leaders, and maybe things that you've experienced, being a Black woman leader?
Yeah. So many tropes, obviously, right? The whole thing about not trying to appear angry. I know I've sat in meetings with colleagues and across we'll text each other, fix your face, right? Because you don't want to be perceived as angry or frustrated. And so there's that. But I think, especially when we look at how society is coming for Black women right now, I think this idea that we have to fight the narrative that we don't belong in these spaces. And I think sometimes we might internalize that belief, right? That we feel like we have to do more. We're told as young girls, do more, work harder, have more credentials, right? That because to create a sense of belonging. And I know I struggled with that myself, right? I struggled with, when I've been in these positions and thinking like, do I belong here? How do I ensure that people know that I belong here? So this constant need to demonstrate your, your credentials and how yes, I deserve a seat at this table. And I think we need to move away from this idea of demonstrating our deservedness because we do deserve it, right? And I think we bring so much to these conversations. We bring a sense of, our own lived experiences. And I think we have to create environments where that's welcome and it's expected. But I do feel like no matter what, I mean, we're still hearing about all the firsts, right? Like here we are in 2024, first, Supreme Court justice of color. We had briefly first president of Harvard, right? I think that, the fact that we're still experiencing so many of these first, and we're seeing the challenges that those women are facing as women of color in these roles, first vice president, right? I think that, we have to, I think while we're slowly chipping away at some of those stereotypes and those tropes, we still have to also acknowledge the fact that they're very real, they're very present. And I think Black women need to embrace that level of that tension, that conflict, right? And say, okay, so if I know this is what is expected of me, or those limited beliefs, how do we counteract them in ways that show people? We ain't got to tell them we can keep beating the door down and say I deserve to be here. I think we're past that. Like I don't believe in having to fight my way into rooms. If I'm in the room and I'm demonstrating my value in the room just by being there, by having opinions, by expressing those opinions, by not putting my head down and not shying away from those tough conversations. Now, don't get me wrong, it took me all the 54 years to get here, right? But I do feel like I think we have an opportunity to empower other young girls to see themselves in this work and to be able to articulate their value in ways that don't feel like it has to be a fight. Because I think that's the thing. If we learn nothing else from the folks whose shoulders we sit on, is that they fought to get to these places for us. We can't let their work have been in vain, right?
Right. Yeah. Thank you. You mentioned a little about empowering young girls, and I want to switch a little to, just some of the work you do consulting with school districts, and even when you were an educator, like in the building yourself and all of that. And just thinking again, back to like having to start these messages early to ensure that Black and Brown kids grow up to be think highly of themselves, think and know that yes, I can be a leader. Yes, I can do this. And so when you work with school districts, or when you've been in the classroom, or as an administrator, what are some of those messages that you think white students receive that Black and Brown students don't? And how does that possibly impact what they're thinking about their capability to be a leader?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think think one of the things that we talk about to teachers now, which wasn't the case when I was in the classroom years ago, was this idea of creating these culturally responsive classrooms and using culturally responsive pedagogy, from the material you select so kids can see themselves in it, right? Like, not reading stories that only have characters that don't look like you or don't have your same lived experience. I think that's a big part of it. But I think the other thing that I'm exploring now more so is this idea of how do we create joy for Black kids. So Goldie Muhammad is an author who's written a couple of really amazing books, and she talks about creating culturally responsive classrooms, but also had the intersection of how do we create joy. And I've been thinking a lot about that because I don't think that most of us as adults think back to our school experience and say, oh, that was joyful, right? We did what we had to do, we survived it. But the idea of creating joy, particularly for kids of color, right? For them to see themselves in the literature, see themselves in books and movies and films and that kind of thing, to see that they have value and that they're capable. Those are not messages that we were sending. And I think we're doing better now because I think schools have made it a concerted effort to think about what culturally responsive teaching looks like. But we also know that that's very much on the chopping block in many districts where we're being told that there's no value in learning about African American studies and such. And I don't think it requires us to formally call it African American studies. I think that the study of America, even whether it's through literature or books or whatever we're doing in classrooms, kids should be able to see themselves. They should be able to see that they have value in this work too, and be able to relate what they're learning to their own lives, to their own communities, and to be able to use their agency. And so when I work with schools now, and I work with teachers in particular, I try to help them see that. It may be that we're talking about their English language arts curriculum, but there still should be a component of that where children of color see themselves in the stories. Children of color see how to relate what they're learning to their own lived experiences, and that their lived experiences are part of the American experience, what they're learning in history, math, wherever it is. Schools were not doing that for a very long time, right? Because that was never the intent of schools. They say things like schools are supposed to be the great equalizer. Well, that isn't the case, and it never has been. And I don't know what we do to get it there. I would if I could solve that problem, I'd be a rich woman, right? But I feel like we can still build capacity for that. We can help teachers understand how much power they have in creating an environment that, as Goldie Muhammad says, creates joy for kids. And I love the concept of creating joy, because I think learning should be joyful, right? You know how we say things like, Black boy joy, right? Black girl magic. Like the concept of magic and joy for our kids, we wouldn't be using those terms if it had not been the counter narrative to that, right? If they weren't experiencing joy, if they didn't feel like they had magic. And so when I think about content and curriculum and what teaching looks like now, what it could look like, I often say this: I should go back to the classroom. I ain't gonna do it, but if I went back to the classroom now, like knowing what I know and being in both the K-12 space and the DEI space, I'm like, wow, I could be amazing with kids of color, like empowering them, filling their cup, pouring into them, showing them that they have value. All the things that I didn't get to experience when I was, younger age, and I was the only Black kid in the classroom, didn't see myself in the curriculum, and didn't have a teacher that had the capacity to pour into me as a child of color. And I think that's the real work.
Yeah. And so there's any educators listening to this today, pour into your students of color, create joy for them. Yeah. That was very beautiful. I want to ask you, as well as, what have you seen in schools around educators supporting BIPOC students becoming future leaders? Like, what are different things that you've seen that work well to help ensure, like, yes, they have the tools, they have whatever they need to be able to eventually become a future leader?
Yeah, I think to the point I was making before about creating these culturally responsive classrooms. Right. But it's also reflected in like what they're learning and how they're learning it, right? And so I think a lot of schools are on their way to adopting more culturally responsive pedagogy and curriculum materials. So I think that's a helpful piece. But I think what's missing from that is also the ability of the educator to use some creativity, right? So I can hand you curriculum that has Black kids in it, right? I can say, here, go teach this. But if you don't have the capacity, if you don't have that equity lens, if you don't say, as I plan this instruction, here's how I want to incorporate these students, the ones that are in front of me, these kids that I know, here's how I want to incorporate them into this content. Because I think that's how you build leaders, right? You help them see that this includes them, that learning is part of what makes them whole, that they are whole, right? They're bringing their whole selves to this work, and that they have the power to do anything that they set their minds to. I think a lot of the time we operate now in, like, maybe a deficit mindset instead of an asset based mindset. And so getting kids to even adopt that for themselves. Where are my assets? How do I use them? How do I bring all the things, all the things that I know already to the classroom? A big part of planning instruction is also helping students to think about what do they already know, right? And how do you build on that? Instead of assuming they know nothing or they know very little, right? So I always say that it's a matter of expectations, because what I do know for a fact is that students always meet the expectations of the adults in front of them, right? And so if you have low expectations of them, that's what you're gonna get, right? But if you have high expectations of them and you help them to see that in themselves, and they have high expectations of themselves, right? Now you've created, now you're cooking with fire, right? Because now they're like, I have the capacity to do this. I'm getting more information about this. I have curiosity that I want to know more about. I'm going to be a critical consumer of all this knowledge that I'm getting, and I'm going to use it for good in my own community, right? I think we have to stop making students aspire to leave their hometowns or to aspire to go on to the other thing where everybody else can go, because we think that that's what we call success, being able to achieve what others have achieved, others who are outside of my demographic, for example.
Right.
And so I think part of empowering is empowering folks to say, how do I use what I've learned to use my own agency in my own community to solve problems, right? And I think, to me, that's empowering students. And that helps to build curiosity too. I think curiosity is another part of education, right? You're supposed to, like, they say, stay curious, right? Like, I think we need to have kids stay curious about the possibilities, not have them have this limited way of thinking about what they're capable of. I often think about to myself, right? And I wish that when I was in, like, the early grades, up to fifth and sixth grade, those formative years, I wish somebody had been pouring into me that kind of language, saying, you are so capable of so many things. Oh my goodness. It wasn't until high school, which is why I became a teacher. My high school English teacher, if you're out there, Mrs. Burns, hey, I don't know where she is, but she said she had this whole, like, swap day thing once. This is so funny. We had this swap roles thing. You had to apply to be the teacher. And I applied to be the teacher. It was English class. And I showed in class the movie Breakfast Club. And everybody thought it was going to be fun. They were just dancing, like, bring food, Valda's teaching, we're going to watch Breakfast Club. Well, there was also, you had to write an essay about lessons you learned from the Breakfast Club, right? And she was really impressed with my lesson and saw that I took it seriously. Yes, they got to watch a movie and it was fun. But, and she said to me after that whole thing, she said, you're an amazing writer and you're going to be, you should be a teacher. You would be great at being a teacher. Guess what? I became a classroom teacher. And I think it was solely because she planted that seed. Prior to that, I had not been thinking about classroom teaching. I really hadn't. And even in my undergraduate studies, I wasn't aspiring towards being a teacher. But I've never forgot that conversation. I never forgot, like, I could even imagine, I still see what I was wearing that day and where we were standing. Wow. Right. And I feel like if every teacher approached every student in that way and said, here's your talent, here's what you're capable of. Right. Because every child has a talent, every child has capabilities. And I don't know that we're telling them that. And they may not get it at home. So I think we have a responsibility to have schools be part of that pouring in to what students are capable of.
Yeah. And also you mentioned briefly too, but about having that equity lens, culturally competent, right? Because you can't treat all your students the same, right? You have to be able to understand where, where they come from, their culture, their background, is in different ways that you may have to work with them and how to tap into them. And I think that's just so important too for teachers to know, like, there's differences that make a difference. And, you may learn all these things about how to, right, teach the subject, but it's like teach the subject to different subjects, right? To different people that are not the same and are not going to learn the same. So I think that's really important.
I think most teachers plan for because they say, well, I can't know every single child's culture.
Right.
I'm not saying that. But I think that our default is always to plan for the dominant culture, right? So we're operating under assumption that all kids are, white, male, and middle class. Well, most of them are not, right? And so how do we change our lens as educators and not put the onus on them, right? How do we as educators say, how do I look at this through the lens of my students, right?
Right. Exactly. So let's shift out of school and into the workplace. And I know, you work with many organizations as well in your consulting and different things. And so at the Winters Group, We've often have clients tell us they can't find diverse or BIPOC candidates to fill leadership. There's no one out there. And that's why the percentages are so low at the top. And I'm sure you've heard the same thing. So how do you respond to statements like that?
So, two things that come to mind whenever, because I hear that a lot too. And I think that here's the first thing is, here's my caveat: representation matters, right? We know that. However, it also doesn't take away the responsibility of those who are not from the dominant culture to know and understand how to operate and navigate places where everybody doesn't look like them. So I think that people often default to this, well, we just can't find leaders of color, right, as their excuse for not addressing issues that affect their members of their organization who are of color. But I think in terms of strategy, they need to have partnerships with minority serving institutions, right? They need to do recruitment from those kinds of places. They need to be thinking about providing the capacity building work around cultural competency with their existing staff. They need to develop mentorship programs and create pipelines, right? So that they're growing leaders of color to be part of their organizations. They need to be thinking about, like, what are our diversity hiring practices? I think we need to challenge some of our HR systems, around this diversity. And I think people tend to think that they can't hire for diversity. That's a bad thing. Like we're being discriminatory. No, because when we think about our hiring practices in most organizations, they are very dominant culture driven. And so having a strategy around, developing these really diverse hiring policies and practices and panels of folks who look a little different. So when candidates come in, the candidates have a fair shot because they're being understood from different perspectives, different lenses. And I think also creating financial incentives. I think about this when I think about schools, for example, because they might not be able to get teachers. They can't recruit teachers to come to certain areas. Well, if there are financial incentives when you're a BIPOC teacher or a BIPOC leader, right? I think we have to be willing to put our money where our mouth is, right? And so make those investments so that we can, recruit more people, and we make it attractive to be part of an organization. Because I do think it's frustrating, it's exhausting, it's tiring to be the only, right? And people who are in those positions of being the only one, their tenure tends to be very short because they're not in cultures where they feel a sense of belonging, right? And so going back to my original caveat, yes, representation matters, but when it isn't there, it's the responsibility of that organization to have a strategy that's concerted and that's focused on creating environments where people of color feel welcome there. And then once they're there, so it's not just recruitment, it's retention, right? Once they're there, they feel a part of the organization. And so it's not just a box check, hey, we've got this many Black folks that work here, but we have this diverse, group of people who work here, this diverse workforce, and they all feel a sense of belonging because we've made it, our work's mission. Because most major organizations, of course, they got it in their mission statements, right? It's on their website. We value diversity, right? And so my thing is, what does that look like, right? And do your numbers show that? Do your investments show that? Does your workforce demonstrate that? And if not, why not? Right? That's the real work. But I also think it's important for these kind of organizations to think about, how they collect data, because I think, they might approach it from we have this many people in the C-suite who are of color, but they don't ask tougher questions like, what's the average tenure? What is our promotion rate of people of color, right? How we develop a pipeline that supports our employees of color, right? So it's beyond just recruitment, it's also retention. And I think that one of the things when I work with leaders, I ask that question, like, so tell me what you're doing. When you say you can't find, when you do have that one or two, what's their experience like, right? How frequently are you having the conversation about what is the experience that we're creating for our BIPOC employees? What about our culture, the environment that we create in our organization makes them want to stay or leave, right? And how do we correct that?
Right, because you can't just stop. That's why there's so many letters in the DEIAB and all of that, right? Because you can't stop at the D. The D is okay, we have the numbers, but then to your point, like, what are we being equitable? Are we being inclusive? Do they belong? Like all those things matter as well. So it's not just all right, we got the people. All right, let's move on. We've done what they wanted. We got, 2 more Black people, but there's more to it.
They say diversity is counting people, inclusion is making people count, right? And so how are you making people count? Because if you were making people count, they would feel more welcome. They would apply to your organization. They would come and they would stay. Right.
Right. And it's, doing this work for so long, and you've done it for a while as well, that sometimes it's surprising that we're still talking about that basics of like, you got to make the heads count, like, or make that right. It's just, I'm always mind blown that we're still talking about that now. And you said something earlier when you answered the question about, right, recruit from different places. Like, and I remember like telling clients that, and they're just so mind blown, like, oh yeah, that is such a good idea. Like, you never thought maybe go to a different school than you always go to. But yeah, so it's,
Yeah, there's a book out recently. It's actually fairly new, by a professor, a friend of mine, and it's about the power of HBCUs, right? I think that people don't recognize, like, our vice president came from an HBCU, right? You know what I mean? And I think that we have to change that narrative around, the quality of folks that are out here, who have gone to, historically Black institutions. People recruit from the same places and they go to the same demographic, and then they wonder why they're not seeing the results. So yeah.
right. And yeah, shout out to HBCUs, Spelman grad here. All right, so I have a question for you. You know that we're launching the Empowerment Institute, that is our BIPOC leadership development program, and you are involved in that as well as a faculty. But I wanted to ask you, why do you think that's important to have a BIPOC specific leadership development program, and why do you think those are helpful?
Yeah. I mean, especially now, right, where we are in the current socio-political climate, where I think that we don't have safe spaces to be able to provide leaders an opportunity to come together with folks that look like them in a safe space where they can really attend as their full selves. Because folks are going to work and they can't be their full selves, right? We have to have that balance of being able to keep our job, right? And so creating a space to really come together as leaders and explore that. To me, that's the key, is to be able to say, these people look like me. We have some shared experiences and we have some shared challenges. And this is a safe space for me to unpack that and have some true thought partnership with people who know what my experience is like, particularly folks that are in these organizations where they're the only one and have no other person that they can have those dialogues with. So the Institute, I think, is a powerful way to bring together leaders from across the country, right? So they can see that it's not isolating. Because I will say, being the leader is a lonely job, right? I mean, I this my experience as a principal. I was the only person of color in the building with 40% of the kids that looked like me. So I didn't have that other adult. So imagine if the Empowerment Institute existed back then, and I had a place to go with and talk to other leaders about, here's the challenges that I'm struggling with. One, it's knowing that I'm not alone, right? So that alone is like a nice woosah. But then being able to unpack challenges together and say, here are the things that I'm struggling with. Here are the things that, that make me not feel like I can bring my whole self to work. And just to have somebody else who is having that experience, but then walk away with tools, right? Walk away with strategies, walk away with ideas, walk away feeling empowered, right? To be able to go back and do that work. Because I think that for many, the first instinct when you are the only one or when you're facing those challenges is to say, I don't belong here, and to have an exit strategy, right? And I'm not saying that in some cases that probably is the way to go, but I think if we can continue to exit, then we continue to leave those situations in that way. And so one of the beautiful things about this is that rather than it be your exit strategy, you say, now I've got some tools to go back and fight this fight well, right? Yeah. And I think that that's the beauty of empowering people of color to come together and to explore the space together.
I love that. That was beautiful. We're going to wind it down because our producers are telling us time is over. But I did want to, so as you know, we called this season From Empower to MEpower. And when I looked up the definition of empower, it's like giving someone the power, right? And we want, folks that go through this program, listen to the podcast, everything, to think about, how can I just tap into my own power, my MEpower, and do, I don't have to wait for anyone to give me anything. I'm going to tap into that. So do you have a MEpower story or something you want to share about how you tapped into your innate power?
So earlier when I did the I am, and I added the meaning of my name, that's something, and you said, I had heard you say it before, you hadn't, because it's new. So in 2024, one of the things that I've been really just exploring with is, how do I use my existing agency? I think prior to, and this again, like I'm in my 50s, so it takes you a minute to get to this place as a woman where you start to say, you know what, I'm really tired of not letting everybody else kind of dictate how I act or how I show up. And so I'm really working hard on creating boundaries, right? Like what are the things that Valda will and will not accept, but also how does Valda lean into her name, right? And so what does power look like for me? What does being fierce look like for me? Not what do people expect that to look like of me, right? And I think think about it like me power is saying, we already have the power. Like that's the first thing, right? So how do I use my power, right? How do I show up in this sitting in my fierceness, right? In a way that is comfortable for me, not for others. That's my work. That's my shadow work that I've been doing for 2024, right? Is really I've been journaling about it. I've been meditating about it. Like I don't know if you've heard people say, like you gotta woman up, right? My mom used to say woman up, right? And so I started thinking about my name. Like I literally have been thinking about like what does Valda mean? And what does it mean to me to be Valda? And how will people experience this Valda in the way that Valda wants to be experienced, not in the way that Valda thinks that they have to experience her. So I'm sitting in fierceness. I'm sitting in the meaning of my name. That's gonna be my me
I feel
power.
like that should be an exercise for the Empowerment Institute. Like, what does it mean to be in whoever participant name, right? Now I'm not the designer, so I can't just be telling y'all what the content to be, but that was really powerful. I love, like you said, not what people expect that to look like. Expect what fierce and powerful looks like. It's how you, Valda, define it, and not making others comfortable. And I do think because as people of color, we do that, right? We try to make others uncomfortable in spaces with us, and that is totally, one of the things that we hope folks will come out of the Empowerment Institute as well. It's like, no, it's not about that. Like are you comfortable? Like that's the first and foremost before you try to worry about other people's comfort. But I love that. I loved it. I loved it.
Yeah, and it's exhausting to try to always please everybody too. I think like we especially women, I think we're kind of taught to like keep our head down and to make sure people are comfortable, and that's exhausting. You get tired of that for a while.
Yes,
so, yeah,
indeed.
yeah.
Well, I truly, truly appreciate you joining me today. I love this conversation. Before I close out, was there anything that you wanted to add or say that maybe you didn't get to throughout this conversation?
No, this was a great conversation, and it's actually given me things to think about too. Because it's not until you're challenged or you're asked a question that you begin to reflect on these things. And I have been thinking about the name thing, but as you mentioned, that maybe it should be an exercise, right? And so I think a lot of times, we have these things in us, right? Like I've had this name for 54 years. Why did it take me so long to start to think about like what my name means, right? And so if nothing else, hopefully I can challenge some of the listeners to begin to think about, like even that, like what are the things that are right there, plain obvious in our faces, right? Part of our everyday lives that we've become so accustomed to, we don't pay attention to them. Our name, like, right? Your name is supposed to be the thing that's supposed to be the most musical to your own ear, right? Which is why people, they say you should do somebody's name. But I don't think I've ever even challenged myself to think about like the meaning of my name, but what does it mean to me, not to others?
Yes.
People are quick to shorten my name too. Like they'll vow me to death, and so it's always kind of irked me because it's 5 letters. I mean, come on, right?
Right.
but like this idea of like I've always been like well, making sure people pronounce it correctly, right? Not say Velda, but now this idea of like what does my name mean to me? I think that's so I'm I'm putting it out there. That's a challenge to everybody else. If you're listening to this, think about your name, think about what it actually means, and think about what it means to you. So.
Thank you. This might be the first homework assignment from this season. So y'all got homework from Valda.
Teachers give homework.
Right. It's very, very on brand. All right. Thank you so much. This has been a great, great discussion and conversation. So I thank you again for joining me today. And for everyone listening, that is a wrap for this episode of From Empower to MEpower. Please join me next time as we further explore the differences that make a difference when it comes to BIPOC leaders. And until next time, stay MEpowered.